Welcome. My name is Wendy Weiss. I am with PIDC. This is PIDC's third New Market Tax Credit Workshop and our second with our partners. We have Charlotte Fulmer from Commonwealth Cornerstone Group, Christina Zapansky from Reinvestment Fund, David Strime from Nonprofit Finance Fund, and Bob Pazanski from LISC. So we're excited to talk today to you a little bit about the basics and then walk you through one of the projects that was recently done to sort of shed some light on how this actually gets started, soup to nuts. I think that the New Market Tax Credit Program is really one of the best tools that we have right now to get projects done in low-income neighborhoods. And so we're thrilled to sort of bring all of that information to you to continue the growth that we've seen. And actually, before we get started, there's been some significant program developments over the last couple of weeks that I wanted to share. First is the New Market Tax Credit Program has been extended for 5 years. And that is pretty significant because it had been extended for 1 to 2 years for the past several. And so finally we now have 5 years that we know there's going to be allocations, and that hopefully during that time we can get the program made permanent. The CDFI fund, who is a Department of the Treasury who runs the program, is going to combine 2 years of allocation. Typically, the allocations are $3.5 billion per year. This year, they're going to announce $7 billion of allocation at the end of the year, is what they've said about 2 weeks ago. So that is very exciting. It's double the amount. So going forward, after this year, the intent is for the program to for the CDFI fund to send out applications out in the beginning of the year and have an award announcements at the end of the year. So that's the intended cycle, and we hope for planning for us that is the way it works. So PIDC is a mission-driven organization. We have real estate and financing that we use to drive growth to what we say every corner of Philadelphia. We support business growth, we foster development, and create jobs. Our financing tools are spread out over small business. We have loans for capital projects. We have loans for working capital, and we have loans for contractors who need bridge financing for their contracts. For larger scale development, obviously we have the New Market Tax Credit. We also have subordinate term loans that we can use as leverage for new market allocations, and we are a EB5 regional center. We also have a portfolio of real estate that we buy and sell on behalf of the city for development. And in the green box we have our history. Since 1958, we've settled 6,700 transactions, totaling about $14 billion in financing. And a little bit about our new market allocation. We've got 3 allocations totaling $148 million. We've deployed that into 14 projects, levering $340 million. 100% of that is in highly distressed census tracts. And these projects have created or will create 1,400 jobs. And our project is neighborhood development, so mixed-use projects, office buildings, all different kinds of stuff. We also deploy it into shopping centers that are anchored by fresh food, grocery stores. And then we've done healthcare projects too. So we try to spread it around the city and spread it around bringing new goods and services, community services, and neighborhood development. Our average allocation size is about $10.5 million. I think the low has been about 5.5 and the high has been 15. And PIDC is dedicated to Philadelphia. And now I'm going to pass this on to Charlotte.
Commonwealth Cornerstone Group was formed by Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency in 2004 to participate in the New Market Tax Credit Program. In 2006, we received our first award, and since then we have received a total of 6 allocations for a total of $271 million, which we have put into 30 projects. We have done projects that are mixed-use development, where there is a piece of residential and commercial. And if we do residential, we do require that at least 20% of the units are affordable. We've done community facilities, such as YMCA's, childcare. We have done health centers, some of which have been the federally qualified health centers, office and retail space, and arts and film studios. As I said before, our footprint is in Pennsylvania. Here in Philadelphia, we have done, as a sample, we have done 600 North Broad Street, where that was lofts and restaurants. Currently, we are working on a project in Chinatown. We have done a project at 38th and Chestnut Street, which was a combination of a child care center, retail, and office. And we have partnered with CHOP for a medical facility, library, and playground. And we have also done office space with community legal services. Our emphasis is on projects that have a catalytic effect, or else they are providing a lot of jobs, or else they are providing services to low income. Our impact so far has been, we have had $875 million in project costs, which represents 2.7 million square feet of either new construction or rehab, over 5,500 construction jobs, and over 4,500 permanent jobs.
So I'm from LISC. We have received 10 awards, over $900 million in allocation, and we've done 100 projects in the new markets. But as I think folks know locally, we provide a lot of other assistance besides just the new markets program. We provide a lot of lending, a lot of pre-development financing, a lot of other technical assistance to support sustainable communities. We allocate the new markets among 30 programs that we serve throughout the country. And we have done 2 transactions in Philadelphia, Paseo Verde, and then a project with Project Home. And we have also facilitated a transaction with CHOP. And we're always looking for new deals. That's why I'm here. We often partner with other CDEs to finance our projects. So, like other folks have said, we generally provide for what we call standalone transactions, somewhere between $5 and $15 million. And as I said, we partner. You can see from our portfolio, we are very broad in terms of asset class. We've done a lot of community facilities, health centers, charter schools, recreational centers. We've done a fair amount of financing for healthy foods, which we consider commercial because they involve grocery stores. And then we also do mixed-use projects. We're getting back into doing some more historic work. So one of the profiles of projects has been taking an old building and putting commercial on the lower floor and then putting residential above. So those are some typical kinds of projects that we've done. The other way that you can access our program, we have buckets. And the bucket that we've been talking about here, which is a bucket that accounts for maybe 80% of the work we do, are these large transactions. But we also have a couple buckets, and the access to them can be a little bit easier for 2 kinds of special assets. And the one is federally qualified health centers. We have set aside a fund that involves both debt and equity to be able to do those. So that's a different sort of access point to us, and we're really proud of that fund. It's an efficient delivery of financing to those programs to promote innovation where they work on elements other than health centers. They work on either housing or something else that helps the health of their of the population they serve. And then we also have a small business loan fund. So we've done transactions as low as $300,000 with new markets in connection with 504 lending, and that is for small businesses who are trying to build or renovate their facility. And that's what we're up to.
Thank you.
Hello, David Strime with Nonprofit Finance Fund. NFF is a national nonprofit. We're really focused specifically on supporting the nonprofit sector, and we do that with basically 3 core lines of business. So we have tailored investments, which is our lending practice, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. Strategic advice, which is an advisory services practice. We have a team of about 35 consultants that work nationally to sort of around nonprofit financial management issues, both with nonprofits as well as their funders. And then what we call accessible insights. So we have a department that is dedicated to sort of taking everything that we do and learn in the field, working with our partners, clients, and funders, and try to disseminate knowledge and share what we've been doing. And we do that we have a national headquarters in New York City, as well as 4 other regional offices, including Philadelphia, which is where I'm based, Boston, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. On our lending program, which is really why I'm here today, we have basically three different ways that we provide financing for nonprofits. So we've got a direct loan program, which probably looks a lot like the loan programs at PIDC and LISC and TRF, and sort of typical community development, financial institution lending, facility project financing, so real estate acquisition, construction, rehab, leasehold improvements, as well as working capital for nonprofits. So we provide term loans and working capital lines of credit, as well as bridge loans for capital grants or for capital campaigns, things like that. We have our New Markets Tax Credit Program, of course. We've been awarded about $230 million in allocation over 6 rounds in the past decade or so. So we've put that to use into a couple dozen projects around the country, including several here in Philadelphia and the Philadelphia area. And for both our direct loan program as well as our New Markets Tax Credit Program, you can see kind of an example or a summary of the different types of projects and clients that we've worked with. It sort of covers the broad swath of the nonprofit sector. I'd say with a particular focus, particularly in recent years, on the healthcare sector, so community health centers and community-based organizations, human service agencies, broadly speaking, and education. We have a fairly large charter school portfolio, and then sort of a handful of other projects in some of these other areas. And then the last thing I'll mention that is part of our lending practice, which is kind of a newer component, is built around our work in the Pay for Success or social impact bond area, which is a whole nother workshop in and of itself. But for those of you who are familiar, it's sort of a performance-based financing tool that's emerging for the social services and healthcare sector. And so I've been leading our work investing kind of a pilot portfolio for Pay for Success projects. So that's my speed summary. I'll leave it at that.
Good morning. I'm Christina Sapansky, and I work for Reinvestment Fund. You notice that we lost the T. The article got removed early this year, and so now we're just Reinvestment Fund. But we still go by TRF, so just because nobody seems to be able to remember the new name. We are a very large CDFI, community development finance institution based right here in Philadelphia that has a national footprint. We've been around for 31 years, and in that time have made over $1.7 billion in investments, and quite a lot of that right here in this region. We are first and foremost a financing institution, and we finance community facilities, early childhood education, K through 12 education, lots of charter schools, housing, primarily affordable housing, but there's lots of, recently we've been doing preservation and conservation deals, and also market where appropriate. Healthy food access is a big vertical for us. Created a number of local and state programs and financing supermarkets in essentially food deserts. Healthcare, this is community healthcare centers, FQHCs, and that's a program we have lots of partners with and do this and have done this in lots of places across the country. Energy is standalone and also in all of our facilities. It's pretty pervasive in our portfolios. And then commercial real estate is, for us, is primarily It's anchor institution-based commercial real estate projects. So it's somewhere where the developer's partnering with a university or a hospital or even a religious institution, somebody who's not going anywhere and really invested in their community. And that is also the same as you'll hear in our new markets. That's how we look at our commercial real estate projects. Reinvestment Fund, outside of the lending, which is the bulk of our people and our investments, we have a really fantastic policy research group, and encourage all of you to look at some of our local childcare map. It's like childcaremap.com, and because there's a lot of good research where we apply the data to the lending to solve problems and bring opportunity to low wealth individuals and places. We have policymap.com, a wonderful tool that is primarily free that all of you should go and look at if you haven't already incorporated it into your daily work anyway. And then finally, we have a small group, a development partners group that does development of housing in select cities along the East Coast. So Reinvestment Fund in new markets. We have won and deployed $473 million of allocation from 8 awards in about 50 projects, and ranging in size from a small of $3.5 million, which is not really representative. Usually the small should be around 5 or 6 million. And the highest was $18.5 million. That doesn't happen too much anymore because that was way back one of the early projects. As I mentioned, we have a national footprint, and in the last few years, we have been using it in our new markets programs with allocations put in the Midwest, Texas, Florida, Louisiana. We did New Orleans last year, Atlanta, Georgia, Charlotte. And so we're starting to move out of our home mid-Atlantic area. We typically have a non-metro requirement in our allocations, and that has increased over the last 4 rounds from 13% to, we actually put in our application this round to do a 25% deployment in non-metro areas. So that is rural, that is not Philadelphia. And it's like the middle, you really can't be anywhere near a metro center. So places that you think of as rural don't actually fit in that definition. They're very specific, the CDFI fund, about what they mean by that. But that's something to take note in when you're looking at CDEs. The kind of final thing I want to touch on is we typically put debt in some way in our transactions where we do allocation, whether it's direct debt, subordinate debt, it's the leverage loan, it's bridge loans for capital campaigns, HRSA grants, whatever it is, RACP grants. We do that not just for our transactions where we have allocation, but we've supported a number of transactions with other folks' allocations and just playing that role. That's one of the, I guess, the benefits, beauties of CDFIs. We are able to kind of do things that traditional banks aren't able to do just because we aren't regulated and don't have the same LTV requirements. We still do due diligence, right? But there are things that we're able to do, and that works really well with the New Markets program. And one thing that we have access to now that we didn't have a couple of years ago is we are a major recipient of the CDFI Bond Guarantee Program, which allows us to have debt that's out to 30 years in length, and that couples very nicely with the new market tax credit unwinds. So we have recently been refinancing A notes with this long-term capital that allows a school to not have to think about what its financing needs are for the next 25 years. And finally, in the corner, just a few projects that we have worked on in Philadelphia, whether it's our allocation or providing debt to another project, someone else's allocation. So this starts the next part of this presentation. This is the basics. So in 10 minutes, I'm supposed to completely inform you and make you feel like you're educated about new markets. So let's get started. What are New Markets tax credits? It's the first federal tax credit program to stimulate commercial investment in low-income communities. It was created in 2000 under the Clinton administration, but actually the first awards weren't out until after that. And it's a very well-liked program, both sides of the aisle. It's well supported, and as you finally saw, it had always been like annual or double year allowances, but we just got authorization for 5 years and for the first time, so that is really critically important. We are advocating as an industry for that still to be a permanent authorization. The tax credit is a 39% tax credit for investments made into businesses and economic development projects in some of the most distressed communities in the nation. It's earned over a 7-year or 84-month compliance period. The program itself is administered by the U.S. Treasury Department through a division called the CDFI Fund in a unique partnership with CDEs. This is full of acronyms, and at the end I have a quick summary of all the acronyms in the program, though I'm sure there's more to be created. So I thought I would start easy because this is a program full of charts and acronyms, right? So really, the CDFI Fund provides allocation authority to CDEs, of which you have local and national represented here. So what is a CDE? We come in a lot of forms. There are many that are affiliates of municipalities. Chicago has one, Atlanta has one. There's a lot of these municipal CDEs. They can be an affiliate of a bank that help meets the bank's community reinvestment goal. So Chase has a CDE, PNC has a CDE, SunTrust, TD Bank, all of those guys have CDEs, or it could be what most of us here are, nonprofit or for-profit entities with a mission to serve low-income communities. We all have defined geographic service areas, and that is actually important for you to know when you are out seeking and dating CDEs to find the ones that best fit with your project. They got to be able to invest in your project. So PIDC can't actually invest in a project that's, say, in Harrisburg, but we all talk, and so they will put you in touch with CDEs that could do your project. We all have primary missions of providing investment capital to low-income communities, and we have, all of us have advisory boards that help us identify those projects and make sure that we are doing things that are best fit with our mission. And I should point out that CDEs do earn fees for deploying and managing allocation, and those who are affiliated with banks, they are doing so because they do get Community Reinvestment Act credit for that. So how does this program work? Through a very competitive application process. We are annually, though we have no idea at what time in that year, delegated New Market Tax Credit Allocation Authority from the CDFI Fund. We attract capital investments with our allocation, and proceeds are used to fund low interest rate loans into qualifying businesses and commercial real estate developments. So that's like how the project works, and it's usually through subsidized financing, and it's very competitive, the actual projects themselves getting allocation. What do you guys receive if you are a recipient project? Well, you get capital, right, like to do your project. It's that last gap. It's usually 20 to 3% is kind of the net benefit piece of that. And there's community benefits. That's what we're really all trying to do, and David will talk about the emphasis on that. And it's high quality benefits. It's not just jobs, right? That's important, but it's the quality of those jobs that are created. And because it's such a competitive program, that is increasingly how we are prioritizing as an industry, as CDEs, our projects. All right, so easy again, CDE. We got the authority, we deploy it into qualic Bs of all shapes and sizes in low-income communities. So, what is a low-income community, or an LIC? LICs are census tracts with at least a 20% poverty rate, or where the median family income does not exceed 80%. But truly, that's not enough. That's like the bare minimum. Of the 50 projects we've done, only one of them hasn't been in an area of higher distress. So what's an area of higher distress? It's an area that has a poverty rate of greater than 30%, or a median family income of less than 60%, and then unemployment of greater than 1.5 times the national average. And then there are all these other things that it could be. And you want to check as many boxes as you possibly can, but there's something important to note. So if it's a food desert that your area qualifies for, but you're building a commercial real estate development that has no supermarket in it, that doesn't really count. It has to be you building a supermarket in a food desert. You're building a community healthcare center or have a tenant who's a healthcare tenant in the medically underserved area. So it's both in order for that really to be an area of higher distress. And I will just note that even though it says that you only need to have 2 of these if you're going to use this other criteria, in reality you need to have 3 or more of those for investors and CDEs to be comfortable. And you can find out all of these things at, remember the policymap.com that I mentioned earlier. You can find out there and just look at each of the different type of criteria. You can also find this information out on the CDFI Fund mapping website. One thing to note, if you do happen to be located in a non-metro area, that in itself makes it a higher distress census tract. Okay, so what is a qualifying business or development, the QualicB? It is an operating business located in a low-income community, and it develops real estate, commercial, industrial, retail, real estate in low-income communities. And it can also develop charter schools, health care, and rehabilitate the real estate. Most of these projects have been in the past. QualicBs have been structured as real estate entities. Increasingly, we are seeing just straight up businesses. So QualicBs, the CDFI Fund is incentivizing CDEs or encouraging us to do some just straight loans to operating businesses. They haven't seen a lot of that, and they would like to figure out a way to get more into the hands of manufacturing businesses for equipment and things other than real estate. But real estate has been and does continue to be a primary structure for these transactions. Something you can also do for sale housing units, but there's only a couple of QualicBs and CDEs who have really figured out how to do that, Habitat being one of those. And so if that's something you're interested in, you should look to those who have already done it and figure out their models. Important to note here, ineligible activities. So straight residential rental property, this is not the tool for you. There are other tools that are perfect for that. There is the 80-20 rule, and increasingly we see this a lot in projects. As long as 20% of your income in your overall project is coming from a commercial use, that is fine. Investors used to be, and CDEs, used to not be comfortable with something that low, and like 30% is okay, but you benefit from us all figuring out in the industry how things really work, because 3 years ago, like below 50% was not something that you would ever see. Other things, straight acquisition or just acquiring properties is not enough. You have to have substantial rehabilitation of those properties. And something important to note, if you happen to have 2 parcels, both of those have to be substantially rehabilitated. It's not on a single property basis. And that if there's 2 buildings on a parcel, both have to have that greater than 20% substantial rehabilitation. And finally, there's the things that it just cannot do. The sin businesses, they're sort of funny. You don't see it a lot. It doesn't really apply to like grocery stores that as long as less than 10% certainly doesn't apply in Pennsylvania, but as long as less than 10% of it is, alcohol-related sales, that's fine. This is for primary business usage. Oh, I circled the ones that most Qualic Bs are this. Okay, so, ooh. I told you I was going to summarize all these things. One more. Okay. That was not supposed to happen that way. But this is your summary of all of the different acronyms that are used in this program. So community development entities, so that's the CDEs, must use substantially all of the proceeds, so all the KABC proceeds, from qualified equity investments to make KABCs, qualified low-income community investments, in qualified active low-income community businesses, Qualic Bs, in low-income communities. There's even one called a LIP, which is low-income persons, right, impacting, but we don't use that too much. That's low-income communities. So there's a test afterwards. No. Okay. So this is why you're here. This is the structure of all of these, actually 95% of these transactions. There are ways to do just straight up equity investments and do things that are already KABCs, and so you don't see the whole structure. It's just a low interest loan in your project. But this is the way that most transactions look. And in reality, this only shows one CDE, right? The average project size is about, the average allocation to a project is about $10 million, whether the project is large or small. And so we are seeing, usually you will see multiple CDEs. So I'm going to try to make this pretty simple. This is without the numbers. We'll show you with numbers, but we start with just the boxes. The CDEs, that's the middle level. The Qualic B is the project level. At the top of this chart, you have two things. You have lender or lenders, that's debt, right? But it doesn't have to be debt. It is oftentimes just straight equity that the sponsor has gathered either from capital campaigns, they may have it themselves, or it is from bridge loans, some other kind of grant and local sources, TIF financing, HUD 108, there's lots of different things. And it's very common for this program to be used with many other subsidy programs. And then you have your investor who is getting that 39% tax credit over the 7-year period. They provide all their equity up front. And so the form in the project, you usually receive this equity plus the debt. Coming down, it's made the investment into QEI, into the CDE, and then to the project level. It usually comes in the form of two notes. The A note, which is matching, if you did have debt, that would be what it's matching at the top. And then the B note, which is really the subsidy from the equity from the new market tax credit investor minus fees, and there are some. And those fees can be taken out at multiple levels, at the investment fund level and the CDE level. So the simplest form is like when it boils down to the bottom, you're getting about 20 to 3% total equity into your project when you count everything into it. So let's look at some numbers. So at closing, and this is a pretty simple transaction, though I did make it a little bit more relevant because it's market. Right now, you're seeing pricing of around 85, in the mid-80s. And so this is in tune with everything that I've seen in the last 6 months. And in this case, there is a $7 loan that's coming from a debt source, a traditional source. And you can see that that matches the senior loan, the A note at the bottom. You see that the equity, they paid 85 cents a credit, the investor in this transaction, and they are receiving $3.30. And unlike historics and other tax credit programs, like that is their return. They're not looking for some preferred return at the end or things like that. Like that is, they're getting their return right there at the beginning, though over the 7-year period, it's taken into calculation. So you can see that we have $10.30 at the top of the structure. And most people call this a funnel, right? We're funneling the money down towards the project. And in this case, and this is realistic, there's a 25-cent fee. So the QEI that is actually being invested into the, down towards the project is net is $10.05. You started out with the $10.30, went to the $10.05. Lots of times you see a fee of some sort being taken out at the CDE level. In this case, it's 10 cents. And so all the way down to the project, you get $9.95 for your project. And that's what happens at closing. It's very typical. In fact, it's a requirement that the borrower needs to provide some equity into the transaction. There's lots of tax opinions, true debt analysis, things like that, but lenders don't provide 100% financing to a project. And so you do see some 3 to 5% equity going into the project at the project level. That doesn't always have to be cash. That can totally be contribution of property and other things like that. So that's at closing. And then at the end of the 7 years, and this is like the NMTC benefit part, right? The only part that has to be paid back is the $7 of principal, that A note. Since there's a lot of lawyers in the room, I won't say that the B note is forgiven, but that's essentially, in reality, that's kind of what happens. There is a tax event if you are a for-profit Qualic B that you need to take into account when you are closing. But for a nonprofit, you can see this is essentially debt forgiveness. And so your project that costs around $10 and got financing of $10 really only has to refinance the $7 at the end of this tax credit period of time, leaving a significant amount of equity in the project. That's New Markets in a nutshell. Now, how do you get this significant benefit in your project?
Okay, pretty simple. So if that's how the program works and how transactions are structured, we thought it might also be helpful to give you a little bit of insight into what really shouldn't be a black box about how CDEs look at potential projects that they might put their allocation towards, and help you understand kind of what the language is that we're all speaking, so that you can make an effective pitch and have productive conversations with potential CDEs and investors. So some of these will seem very sort of logical and straightforward. So, for example, as Christina said, there's not just a program requirement, but really practically for CDEs, there's a pretty high bar in terms of demonstrating the level of distress where the project is located. And so, as you're having a conversation with a potential CDE, one of the things right off the bat is to know whether or not your project is located in a highly distressed census tract, not just that it qualifies. I think another sort of high-level thing that might seem intuitive, but make sure that you can describe it in this way, is that there is a financing gap, because in addition to all of these sort of compliance-related boxes to check, it's also going to be very important for CDEs to know that there is truly a need that sort of passes the community development but-for test. This project will not be successful or not proceed but for this source of subsidy. And then I'll talk more specifically in a couple of slides about what measurable substantial impact means and sort of how to think about that. But certainly it's not just about being in a highly distressed place and having a project that pencils out, but that also sort of as a result of doing this project, you'll be able to bring substantial benefits to the place where you're operating and to the community that you're serving. Charlotte's going to talk a little bit about project readiness, so I won't steal her thunder. But that's a big one, and all I'll say on that is that that this is typically going to be the last piece. So CDEs are not interested in making any kind of formal commitment, for a project that isn't going to be ready to really close on the financing and start construction for another year or something. There's a pretty tight window, so readiness is important. And then in terms of the size, some other folks have already touched on this. There's kind of a sweet spot, and so all I would say to reinforce that is most CDEs have that sweet spot. It might be 5 to 15 million. It might be 8 to 12 million. But if your project is smaller than 5 million, it might be a sort of a tough economic sell to have this pencil out. On the flip side, if it's larger than 10 or 15 million, it certainly doesn't mean it's not a good fit for new markets. It just means that you might be looking for allocation from multiple CDEs. And as Christina said and Wendy said, that's a very common thing for CDEs to be working together to combine their allocations. So that's to be expected for larger projects. And then finally, I'm not sure that there's something for you as a project sponsor or a Qualic B to do with this information, except be aware that CDEs are looking at not just individual projects on all of these criteria and merits, but they're also looking to kind of create a diverse portfolio of projects geographically and by sector and size, et cetera. And so, and that kind of relates back to the fact that this is a competitive program, and CDEs need to go back to the CDFI fund every year and put in their applications and say, we're doing what we said we were going to do, and then there may be sort of other reasons why they want to have a diverse portfolio of new markets projects. So on the question of sort of what does diversity look like, or what types of projects get financed, I just want to say a couple things about this chart. This is data from a survey of CDEs that was published in 2014 by the New Markets Tax Credit Coalition about projects that were financed in 2013. This is, I think, the latest report that's out there. And as you can see, there's a range. There are a few uses, if you can't see from the back, mixed uses at the top or on the left here, and then manufacturing and industrial, and then healthcare, and then charter schools are sort of the top four. One thing that is interesting, I went back to the last few reports that looked at this breakout, and it's not the same every year. So there are some years where charter schools are, one of the top categories of projects that were financed, and this is not necessarily new markets allocation, but this is by total project size, assuming that projects are typically but not always fully financed with new markets tax credits. They may be partially financed. So it depends on the year, and I think that's sort of important to know, but that you'll see some common themes that there are these handful that are always going to be towards the top that tend to get the most allocation. The other thing to note about this is that these were probably, it doesn't say, but these were probably almost all real estate related or facility related financings. And so while the CDFI fund would like to see more financing go into operating businesses for operations as opposed to for facility projects, when we talk about manufacturing and industrial, that doesn't mean that there was $1 billion that went into the operations of those kinds of businesses, but rather those were projects, most likely that were projects sponsored by businesses in that industry. So lastly, I just want to touch a little more in depth on what impact means for this program and for the CDFI fund and for CDEs, and therefore for you. So one thing I'll note here is that I've got these bullet points of, these are sort of the primary categories at a very high level for what the CDFI fund as the administrator of the program is looking for. And therefore, these are really the categories of things that are of primary concern to CDEs. And so when you're having those conversations with CDEs about your project and getting allocation, this would be a good sort of cheat sheet to have, or even better, this is probably something that you've spent some time with in advance, thinking about exactly how your project is likely to hit, clearly not all of these, but for the ones that are relevant, and for all that are relevant, as much as you can say about the projected impact, with this framework would be very helpful. And as Christina said, it's more detailed than this. It's not just jobs; it is quality jobs. It is the quality of these impacts, not just the size. And on that note, I also I have these two boxes on the side here, which I thought would be helpful, particularly given the there's I'd say more focus these days than ever on sort of thinking about outcomes and quality of impact, and being sort of more thoughtful about defining what we all do in our mission-driven work to serve low-income communities. That it's not just about outputs and counting widgets of impact or units of impact, but really like what are we trying to accomplish, which is great, and I think CDEs would love to hear about that, and the CDFI fund would love to hear about that. But the reality is, the reporting is still going to come more in the form of outputs, the sort of traditional impact reporting. And so that's something to be aware of, that if you can talk all day long about how the quality of health for the patients that you as a health center serve is going to improve because of this project, that's great, and that's really important, and we all know sort of conceptually that that's the whole point. But if you can't talk about what this project will mean in terms of increasing the number of patients and patient visits and whatever the metrics are, things that are sort of measurable, quantifiable, then you'll have probably a harder sell. And these are the kinds of things that a lot of CDEs may request or require you to document in a community benefits agreement, so it's on paper at the time of closing. That's not a program requirement, but that may be something that I think probably most CDEs will look for, so be prepared for that. And then there's certainly ongoing reporting related to that over the course of the 7-year period. So I will leave it at that and hand it over to Charlotte.
Those of you who raised your hand that you have a project, how many of you think that your project is ready to go, ready to close? Okay. All right, well, we'll see if you are or not. I will ask, and remind me to ask at the end of this if you think your project is ready to go. I have tried to make this as simple as possible. There are 4 P's of project readiness: the property, the projections, proposals, and professionals. And when you have all 4 of those P's lined up, then you are ready to go. These are the things that we as CDEs are looking for. So let's start with the first one, which is the property or the project site. As both Christina and David have talked about, they've talked about the eligibility of the census tract. So you need to make sure that it is, first of all, eligible, and that the use that you're planning to do is something that is eligible. For example, not one of the sin businesses. And as I think several of us have already talked about, we're looking for projects that aren't just eligible, but that they are located in highly distressed census tracts. Another thing about your site is, do you have evidence of site control? Do you have an agreement of sale that has not expired, or one that is not getting ready to expire? Because if it's getting ready to expire, it may cost more to extend it, and it also may cause some time pressure for the closing if your agreement of sale is due to expire. Another thing about the site is the zoning and project approvals. If it's not by right, do you have evidence of zoning approvals? Another thing is, does the project have community support, as evidenced by letters or a community plan? Environmental. Do you have any reports on hand? And if so, how old are they? We're not interested in ones that are several years old. They need to be current. And if there is a phase 2, do you have evidence of the work being done that was recommended? How about your plans and contracts? Do you have construction documents? Do you have a general contractor lined up? And do you have an architect on board? The next thing is projections. You need a pro forma of how this project is going to work once it is up and running. So do these projections demonstrate that you can meet the debt service coverage? Do you have collateral available and the loan to value? How about signed leases or letters of intent? Do you have experience as a developer? Can you show that you've closed other projects, not necessarily new market tax credit projects, but other projects? And you also need project sponsors and guarantors. You need to have those lined up. The next is proposals. It's like, show me the money. Show me that you can really do this. So do you have your leverage lenders lined up, such as commitment letters or term sheets? Have these leverage lenders financed a new market tax credit project before? Do they understand the limitations? For example, sometimes you want to use maybe a local bank to be supportive of the local bank, but maybe they have never done a new market tax credit project before. They need to understand that they will not be able to have the real estate at the project level cannot be the collateral for their loan. If you have soft funds and grants, you need somebody to bridge those. So do you have that? Do you have those bridge lenders lined up? Again, looking for term sheets or commitment letters. And if it's a public source, evidence that they have okayed the use with new market tax credits. For example, here in Pennsylvania, we have what is called the RCAP program. Do you have a signed agreement with them? A lot of times that will be entering into the project as a developer will come to us and say, well, I've applied for RCAP. Well, as we all know, with the budget battles that are going on, we have some that were actually approved under the 2014 budget, but we still don't have a signed agreement. If there is a closing draw going to be involved in this, you need to have all of your evidence, your backup documentation pulled together. And all the sources have to be in place for closing. And last but not least is, does it meet the but-for test? But for the new market tax credits, this project could not get done. The last P is professionals. Have you even thought about who is going to represent you? And I highly recommend that you have somebody who is familiar with the new market tax credit program, because there are a lot of nuances in it. And so you want somebody who is familiar with the program, and that's relatively a small group from which to select from. A lot of times, again, a developer might want to use local counsel just to be supportive of the local group. You might be able to use them for, say, the real estate transaction, but you really need somebody who is familiar with the program for the new market tax credit piece. Accountants are involved in the projections. We have Cone Resnick, who is represented here today. They are some that are familiar with the, more than familiar, they're experts in the field. You have Novogradac and Baker Tilly, just to mention a couple there. Also, have you started talking to any investors and found out what their interest level is in your project? Usually the investors are banks. Ones that we have worked with have been PNC, US Bank, Chase, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs. Another thing is, if you've never done a new market tax credit project, it's a very complicated process, and it's good to have somebody who can guide you through all of the weeds. Yes, we've told you a little bit about it today, but as you can see, there's a lot that you have a lot of questions after hearing what you've heard. It's good to have somebody who can guide you, so you need to look for somebody who has experience, new market tax credit experience in consulting. And they can also not just help guide you, but they can also help you find allocation a lot of times. And then have you started, as Christina said, dating the CDEs? This doesn't necessarily mean whining and dining them, but it's talking to them and selling them your project, talking about the impacts, talking about your project readiness, letting them know this is what all you have in hand, making sure that it is in their geographic territory. It's worthless to spend a lot of time talking to them. I get phone calls from people from Florida, and I'm like, we only do projects in Pennsylvania. If they had just looked at the website, they would know that. So now let me ask those of you who have a project, do you think that your project is ready to go?